All right, good evening. Before we get into our class, I may get Billy and Robert help me out again. I don't know if it occurred to me last week. I'm not sure I even said thank you, but I appreciate the help. I got some more of these. We'll do the same as last week, and we'll just leave them together.
Let's give Billy one.
If you did not get one last week, just let these gentlemen know, and I'll make sure you got one. Again, this is a new-ish booklet put out by the House to House School of Evangelism, and it's designed for if you're studying with someone who maybe they say, I don't believe in God, or maybe they just say, I'm not sure. You may sometimes encounter somebody in just day-to-day talking or maybe engaging in evangelism. Of course, we ought to be engaged in evangelism every day, just even as we're talking. Sometimes we think of it as some kind of event. It ought to be kind of a part of our everyday lives. We're talking about the church, talking about spiritual matters. But you may encounter somebody that says, I don't believe in God, or you may encounter somebody that says, I'm not sure, or you may encounter somebody who says, well, I do believe in God, but I don't know that I could tell you why. Or as far as, if somebody called upon me to give proof, give an answer, of course that's what we're called upon to do in 1 Peter 3:15 is to be ready to give an answer. So you may encounter somebody like that. Again, that's more or less the booklet A that we're looking at first. Booklet B, dealing more with the Bible. You may have somebody that says, well, sure, I believe in God, but not so sure about the Bible. Or maybe they don't believe in the Bible. Maybe they think it contains errors, or that it's, you sometimes hear people make the statement, well, it's just written by men. That's booklet B. C deals more with Jesus as the Christ, the Son of the living God, God in the flesh, the Messiah. You may encounter somebody who has doubts about that or doesn't believe that, or maybe they are not sure or need to confirm their faith. And you may even, some of us here in this audience, going through the class, may find that some of those are the case for you. You may say, well, I know I believe in God. I just, if somebody says, prove it to me, I don't know. Or if somebody says, prove to me that the Bible's not just written by men. Prove to me Jesus is the Christ. And those, sometimes people say, in fact, I can't tell how many times throughout the years, I don't know, maybe a time or two here, but just as a preacher throughout the years, sometimes people have asked, it may be a question in the question box, or it may just be a question in general, where they ask a question, may not be anything pertaining to these topics per se. I remember one in particular was pertaining to instrumental music, mechanical instruments of music in worship. Somebody asked a question, I think it was when I was maybe in South Alabama, that they said, look, I know it's not a good thing to do, but boy, if I had somebody say to me, you show me from the Bible why we should not be using mechanical instruments of music. I just don't know that I could do that. So they asked, could you do a sermon on that? So of course we did. But again, you may be as much learning from this and confirming your faith, and I hope even if some of these things that it serves as, the review of it serves to strengthen your faith, because the evidence is there. We live in a world that is constantly trying to saturate us with the message that God does not exist, that the Bible is not inspired of God, that it's just another book, or that Jesus was a good man, sometimes people will say, but the Son of God, I don't think so. That's the message that we get from so many different angles, but especially pertaining to God's existence and evolution and things like that. But the evidence is there. Is Bob, is that you back there at the booth? Okay. You may have to open up the auditorium mics, but I wanted you to. Bob and I were talking yesterday. I want you to give what you were telling me. Two different approaches, I think was the way you put it, to talking about the existence of God. Bob he's done a lot of study, as most of us know, in apologetics. It's kind of, I kind of feel silly sometimes standing up here teaching with Bob in the class, but I wanted you to share that because I think it was a very good point about the two different approaches.
Yes, there's two major approaches to apologetics. Of course, what's apologetics? It's not saying I'm sorry for anything. It's not saying I'm wrong. Actually, it's saying we're right. Apologetics means defense of the faith. There's two types: presuppositional and evidential. Presuppositional assumes the Bible is true, and we start with the Bible is true, never giving that up. An example of that would be debating an atheist and saying, we're going to come here to debate, and we assume we're free to make arguments and we're going to use logic. Well, the atheist who does not believe in things past the material world does not really, in his own view, believe in logic or the foundation for argumentation and freedom. So, from a presuppositional approach, by him coming to the debate, he already lost. Now, that is a little deep and it's a little philosophical, but the same thing is true with science. Science assumes tomorrow is going to be like today. So if I put my hand on the stove today and it burns, it's not like I say tomorrow, wow, it's going to be the greatest meal of my lifetime. I'm going to put it on the stove. No. Now, why is that true? The atheist cannot talk about that because to him everything granted. But the Christian knows God is out there and science is possible only because of the Christian worldview. And then lastly, the evidential approach, which is a very common approach in apologetics, is we find evidence and we keep on talking about the evidence, hopefully until some point the unbeliever says, okay, I see there's a lot of evidence for God. Now, sometimes he has philosophical tools that he will justify his position, and we can never seem to get to him. So that's why we need presuppositional apologetics too, that will help him to realize he's not got a foundation for what he believes. So those are the two major approaches, and we need both.
I agree, and that was kind of a discussion Bob and I were having yesterday. We were sort of chatting about this, and the presuppositional approach, you're presupposing that the Bible is true, and you work from that, and it's true because it's what Bob's point was true, because when you talk about sometimes atheists, skeptics will make statements like, you're just so unreasonable. It's so unreasonable to believe in God. Well, tell me about reason. Where do you even get reason? And that's kind of with the presuppositional approach. And as Bob said, it sometimes gets just a little bit into a philosophical approach, but it's still true nonetheless. You don't have logic, you don't have reason without some kind of a standard. And if you go and you're engaged in a debate with an atheist, a skeptic, even talking like in a formal debate, there are rules that govern a debate. Well, are those just rules that somebody made up, or can you just throw anything out there? What makes something true? What makes it provable? All these things require some kind of a standard. And so, as Bob mentioned, one of the things that we were talking about that he mentioned, and it's absolutely true, it's, as with so many things, it's not an either-or approach. It's working together. You have the presuppositional, and then what did you call that second one? How did you? Evidential. Yeah, using evidence, and that's kind of what we study a lot as well, talking about, as we began last week, talking about the cause and effect, and we'll talk about design demands a designer, human morality. Those are evidences. But as Bob mentioned, there are some of these deeply philosophical things that sometimes skeptics and atheists will come back with. Even on those, you look at that and you say, how could anybody answer that? And I submit logically you can't, but they have these retorts sometimes. And so I think you do need to use a hand-in-hand approach with those two, methods you might call them. But I wanted Bob to mention that because he said that yesterday, and I don't know that I had really thought of it, given it a whole lot of thought, as two different approaches, but they are kind of different because one, you're presupposing the Bible to be true. The other one, you say, okay, well, let's just look at the evidence around us, evidence that is within us, ourselves, being the human body, and the design, the amazing design that it shows, and the morality that's within humanity, and so on. So we'll try to kind of work all that in as we go through this. And in fact, I think in these booklets you'll see it's kind of interweaving. It's not really going to stop and say, okay, here's the presuppositional approach, and we're going to have a few questions in the booklet, then go to the evidential approach. But they're both interwoven throughout. So we started talking last week about cause and effect. I think I've been I was originally trying to kind of weave this in as we went through the book. I think what I want to do, though, is go through the booklet, and then we'll come back and reinforce some of these things because it's interwoven in each booklet. And so I think it's going to be more difficult on me, and as far as just all of us kind of dialing in, trying to do it as we go along, as opposed to going through the booklet, and then we'll make some observations on cause and effect, design, as well as morality. So I did edit the slides a little bit. In Rob's slides, he shared these with me. He designed the slides to go with, and it's, as you see, it's just a duplicate of what you've got in your booklet, but it's just there on the screen. That helps, and somebody may be watching via live stream and not have a booklet, so that's helpful for them. But he has actual answers with each one. I went and edited those out. We can answer those. You can answer them in your booklet. We'll answer them in the class, but I just thought that might make it easier and flow a little bit better as we go along. We got started, just to review what we covered, who or what was in the beginning. Again, these booklets don't require belief in God. Somebody may say, look, Chad, I don't believe in God. Why, I don't want to sit down and have a Bible study with you. So, that's fine. Let's just have a conversation, and let's look at some evidence. Surely you're a reasonable person. I think most people would like to at least think that they're reasonable people. Let's have a conversation and just take a look at some of the evidence. So who or what was in the beginning? Do you believe the material world had a beginning? Somebody either says yes or no. Well, it's logical to believe that it had some kind of beginning. We talked about this last week. Scientists know that matter is not eternal. So the next question is, do you believe the material world created itself from nothing? We know matter is not eternal, so it had to be created. Did it create itself? Did it spontaneously come into existence from nothing? Or did it create itself? Well, neither of those are very logical, is it? Next question, do you believe it is possible that there was an energy in the beginning that cannot be created or destroyed that could have been responsible for creating the world? Well, somebody, you may have somebody here that says no. I wouldn't just, that's not a situation where you just go, well, we're done here. You're illogical, unreasonable. I'm going home. They may be at that point still. You're very early, obviously, in this conversation. Somebody may say, no, I don't believe there was any kind of energy in the beginning. That would be what we would call eternal, can't be created or destroyed, that could have been responsible for creating the world. Say, well, okay. Would you be open to the possibility that this could be the case and that energy is identified in the pages of Scripture as God? Maybe you can at least get somebody to say, well, I'm at least open to that. May say no to that even. I'm still going to keep going if they're willing to have the conversation. Obviously, there's, in fact, I think it was Papa and I had this conversation not terribly long ago. I was kind of asking for some advice because sometimes it's difficult to know when is it time to move on. If you're studying, this could be in a Bible study or this could be in a study like this where you're talking to somebody who maybe they don't believe in God. And that's a difficult situation. And I don't know that there's a standard answer that you can give for every situation. Well, I know there's not a standard answer you can give for every situation because situations are unique. I've told Bremen folks before, my freshman year at JSU, I'd just gotten out of high school, started at JSU, no idea what I wanted to do with the rest of my life. I tell people I sort of fell into preaching and discovered I really, really enjoyed that, and working with people and teaching and preaching God's word. And so that's what I ended up doing, of course. But there I was, a freshman at JSU, and I was involved with the student center with the Jacksonville congregation. And I remember at the student centers where Alan Webster, who was preaching there at the time, he had his office. So some days I'd come in there and he'd be studying with this young man. He was dating one of the girls in the college group. And this fellow was just entrenched in sectarianism. He'd grown up in it. He was about 18 years old. A very, what's the word I'm looking for? Confident, yes. I was thinking confrontational, but he wasn't just a confrontational person. He was confident. He was very confident in what he believed, and so sometimes I'd come and Alan would have his office door open, and I could hear him studying with this fella, and sometimes I could hear him saying, "No, that's not what that means," and he would just. And one day I remember thinking this had happened several times where they'd be in a study, and I could hear them kind of back and forth, and I'll be the first to admit, my thought was, Alan needs to move on. I think he's wasting his time with this fella. And in the meantime, they kept doing their studies, and I was going to the student center less and less because I started working with the Ironton congregation with the youth, and of course then we got out for the summer, and by the time fall rolls around, I'm enrolled at the Memphis School of Preaching. And fast forward just a little bit, my home congregation asked me to come that following spring to speak at the youth day. And up walks this fella that Alan had been studying with. "Hey man, how you doing? You remember me?" "Yeah, I remember you." "How's it going?" "Pretty good." "And what's going on with you these days?" And I said the following spring, this was a year or two later, I believe. "What's going on with you these days?" He says, "Well, I'm about to go to the Memphis School of Preaching." I said, "Wow." I'm sitting here thinking, do they accept denominational folks? So, but in the course of the conversation, I come to find out he obeyed the gospel. And the guy's a gospel preacher today. And it's because Alan hung in there. At times it may have seemed like I'm banging my head against the wall. So, it is difficult to know. And so, anytime you get an answer that looks like a closed door, at least try to keep that door open. And that, again, that's true whether you're talking these studies, Bible studies, whatever. If you can keep the door even slightly open, who knows what might happen. So would you be open to the possibility that this energy could be called God? Hopefully the person you're talking to would say, okay, let's consider it. And I had a situation recently where a gentleman says he doesn't believe in God, but he says, "Yeah, I'll talk to you." Of course, he says several times, "You're not going to change my mind, but I'll talk to you." Well, hey, that's all I can ask for, right? So you see Genesis 1:1 there in the beginning, God created the heaven and the earth, King James Version says. So next question here. This section is a building requires a builder, and this gets into a little bit into the design argument. Does every house have a builder? Well, I think we all know the answer to that. You don't see a house and assume it just happened, or that an explosion took place there on that job site, and there you go. You got this nice house that just came out of that explosion, right? Well, isn't it impossible for a house to build itself? If you're studying with anybody who is even halfway reasonable, they're going to have to answer, yes, it is impossible for a house to build itself. And of course, we're familiar with Hebrews 3 verse 4, which says what? Every house is built by someone, but he that built all things is God. And that's that design concept. Would it not be equally absurd to suggest an infant could build a house? And this gets into, we talked about just a little bit last week, it's not just that every effect demands or must have a cause. Every effect must have an adequate cause. And so you see a house, a building, and you wouldn't say, Well, that's got to have some kind of a cause. Maybe the children did that. Well, that's not going to be the case. That's not an adequate cause. You wouldn't say, well, maybe some animals got together in the woods and decided they're going to build themselves a log cabin, tired of sleeping outdoors, so they built themselves this nice-looking log cabin. Well, we know that. We know better than that. And so that's kind of the why of that question. It is absurd because some causes are inadequate. An atheist may say, well, sure, every effect demands a cause. Here is the universe. The cause was, fill in the blank. They may say Big Bang or spontaneous generation of life or whatever. But that's not an adequate cause when you start peeling back the layers. Can a house appear from nothing? Well, to ask that question is to answer it, but we do have to ask it because that's the suggestion when it comes to the universe, right? And so when you're going through a study such as this, you want to answer the questions, but you're kind of making comments as you go along as well. It is not possible that a house could appear from nothing, nor would it be possible for the universe to appear from nothing. Or maybe I might frame that as a question. If it's impossible for a house to appear from nothing, how could I possibly reasonably believe that the universe appeared from nothing? And I might just ask that question. Say, well, help me understand where you're coming from. How would you explain that? How would you explain how would you even try to make that sound reasonable? So, next question. Is it possible that a house has always existed? Is it eternal? Well, again, we know better than that. We know if there's a house there, somebody made it. It had a beginning. Must the builder of the house be greater in ability and power than the house? And that's the idea that creation is not greater in ability and power than the Creator. And so if a house requires a builder, is it possible that the universe would require then a builder, an effect, a cause? And we sometimes even say an uncaused cause. Because if you go back, eventually, the law of cause and effect brings us to what sometimes is referred to as a prime mover, an uncaused cause, an eternal cause with no beginning. So again, you have Hebrews 3:4. Every house built by someone who built all things is God. And again, hopefully you're dealing with somebody here who's reasonable enough to say, well, at least it is possible that the universe would require a builder. If somebody at that point says, I'm not even entertaining the possibility, well, then you got to, again, it may not be time to just shut it down, but it's at the very least cause for concern if somebody's going to just be that closed-minded. All right, moving on. Every effect must have a sufficient cause, or as we said, an adequate cause. So is the existence of the universe greater than the existence of a house? Well, a house is no small thing. Obviously, some houses bigger than others, some houses more ornate than others, more technologically advanced, whatever. You got some people, like saying it on mission trips sometimes, it might just be some cinder blocks, dirt floor, clapboard type roof, as opposed to something very nice. You may have a house that's built on a slab or nice, insulated, indoor plumbing, and so on and so forth. But even the nicest of houses, do they really compare when you're talking about the universe? It is no comparison. It's infinitely greater, the universe that is, than a house. Do you believe that it would be impossible for the universe to create itself? I don't know, again, how you could be reasonable and say, I think it's possible for the universe to create itself. I think you have to admit reasonably, how is it even possible for the universe to create itself? Wouldn't it be impossible, next question, for the universe to have, did I say possible? I meant impossible. Wouldn't it be impossible for the universe to have come from nothing? again, that the answer here kind of tells you something about the mindset of the person you're talking to. And sometimes you may breeze through questions like this in this type of conversation, or if you want to call it a study. You may breeze right through and they're answering questions logically, correctly, and you may move quickly through certain portions. You may find even right here very early in the conversation you're having to slow down and say, okay, because they may be saying, well, no, I don't think it's impossible for the universe to have come from nothing. How else would it have come to be? Obviously it's got a beginning. Why couldn't it just come from nothing? Are you saying that there's no chance life could have spontaneously generated? Okay, well, I might just say, well, stay with me. Let's keep looking at the evidence. And I think hopefully you'll see that there's just not evidence to support that. Wouldn't it be equally impossible, next, for a man to have created the universe? Well, again, the universe is far more expansive, intricate, complicated than even the amazing design that we see within humanity. How could a man have created the universe? It's not even possible. I don't know how even an atheist would say that. In fact, I don't know any atheist who does say that. Well, a man created the universe. So surely you can get at least agreement there. And always, in any time I'm in a study, Bible study or a conversation about the existence of God or the inspiration of the Bible, whatever it might be, I would encourage you, look for the common ground anytime you can find it, and use that to establish relationship, because nobody wants to be, well, most people, unless you have just a really person who just loves conflict, but people don't want to just be constantly at odds. And so anytime I can find common ground with somebody, that's what I want to do, and establish some common ground and say, well, here we can agree on this. And that's one, I think, where I think far more often than not, people, even somebody who says, I don't believe in God, would agree it's impossible for man to have created the universe. Okay, so we know man can't have created it. It's got to be something else. Hey, that's some common ground. So take it and use that to say, hey, we agree on something. And I might even, I've even been in situations, even in Bible study, where I say, hey, well, you and I haven't agreed on a lot so far, but at least we agree on that, right? And we kind of laugh about it, and that's just lightens the mood. Brother Keeble, I was thinking about this with Brinkley's funeral last week. Brother Keeble used to use a lot of humor in his sermons, and some people thought Keeble was just kind of a goofball being silly or whatever, but he wasn't. He used that humor because in fact, Brinkley said he remembers, he told the students a lot of times, if you can make people laugh, you can make them listen. And if you can make them listen, you can make them learn. But he said when somebody's all cold and rigid, and they come in there angry, and they may even come visit the meeting. And Brother Keeble would talk about sometimes people would come, sometimes white folks would come. Of course, this is in a very segregated time in our country. Sometimes the white folks would come just out of curiosity to hear this black preacher that they've heard so much about. Boy, he's such a good speaker. Sometimes people would even come from denominations. I'm just going to hear what this guy says. I've heard about how he likes to talk against this denomination or that denomination, and I'm going to go and just hear. And so they come, and they're kind of just rigid, and they're just, they're expecting to disagree, and it's more of a curiosity. And some of those folks, many of those folks, ended up obeying the gospel because he had a way of loosening up people, and a lot of that was humor. So anyway, use the common ground. All right, next. Must the builder of the universe come from outside the universe itself? Well, if the universe can't create itself, then yes, the builder of the universe would have to come from outside the universe itself. Must the builder of the universe be greater in ability and power than the universe? Again, logically, you have to say yes. Because how could something be equal to its creator? Or especially be more powerful than its creator. Must the builder of the universe be older than the universe? Well, that's kind of one of those that, again, might kind of have a laugh and say, well, duh. If if I create something, of course, you and I, we can't create matter. We understand that, first law of thermodynamics. But if I could, I would have to exist before it because I'm creating it, right? That just kind of stands to reason. Next, does the fact that we apply a date to the universe imply it had a beginning and therefore has not always existed? We touched on this last week briefly. Every time scientists try to assign a date to the Earth, to the universe, to the galaxy, solar system, and so on, every time they even seek to attempt assigning a date, that's an admission. It had a beginning. And again, there's some common ground you can get because, well, hopefully you can get because science universally acknowledges matter is not eternal. It had to have a beginning. So at least we can get some common ground on that and go from there. Where did it begin? How did it begin? Well, let's talk about that, but surely we can acknowledge, we can agree, it had a beginning. And that leads us to the next page here. If it's not possible for material things, matter, in other words, to be eternal, and it's not, is it possible for a non-material power like mind or spirit to be eternal? I feel like we touched on this last week. I can't remember for certain. It may have been right at the end of class. But we understand. In fact, I was thinking, well, if I can find it, I had it in some other notes that I was using last week. Isn't that the way it goes? If you're ever looking for something. Oh, yeah. We were talking about the law of cause and effect. Where there is an effect must be an adequate cause. The problem is the universe exists, obviously. Got to be some way to explain it. But there are only three possible choices. Either it is eternal, the universe has no beginning and no end. Or it's not eternal, but it created itself out of nothing. Or number three, it's not eternal, but was created by something or someone anterior and superior to itself. When you think about choice number one, the universe being eternal, science knows and has proven matter's not eternal. In fact, there are numerous quotes. Here's just one. Dr. Robert Jastrow, if I'm pronouncing that right, he made the statement, "Only as a result of the most recent discoveries can we say with a fair degree of confidence that our universe has not existed forever, that it began abruptly, without any apparent cause, in a blinding event that defies scientific explanation." And as we admitted, or as we pointed out just a moment ago, the fact that science seeks to assign a date as to the origin of the universe, the earth, and so on, is an admission that it has an origin. Well, number two option was, did the universe create itself out of nothing? It's absurd even to suggest that matter created itself. Even to suggest that sounds and is just utterly ridiculous. There's absolutely no known process by which that could even happen. Dr. George E. Davis, a physicist, he made the statement, "No material thing can create itself." So the universe is not self-explanatory, and so the only remaining alternative is the universe was created by something or someone that existed before it did, superior to it, of a different nature. And so that led us into, and that was where we ran out of time, and that's what I was trying to remember exactly how much of that we covered. And I don't think we got to this part, or if we did, it was very quickly. Everything that exists can be classified as either mind or matter, right? We understand that. Scientists have acknowledged that. There's matter, then there's what we might call mind. But everything is either mind or matter. Well, we've already pointed out something exists, the universe exists, and so we've got to explain, well, where did it come from? Either it had to have a beginning, it had to have an adequate cause, which will be either matter or mind. Well, matter is not eternal, and so that only leaves a mind. It must be mind that is eternal, and that mind is identified and described in the Bible as Jehovah, God, the great I am, in different descriptive terms that are used for God. And so that ties in with that first question here on this slide. If it is not possible for material things, matter, to be eternal, is it possible then for a non-material power, like mind or spirit, to be eternal? The answer is yes, it is. And then he mentions here the first law of thermodynamics. Energy can neither be created nor destroyed, which is interesting because when you study creation, we sometimes even sing a little song. My children, it's funny because sometimes when we're doing Bible time, I'll ask one of the little ones, I'll say, I'll pick a day of creation. What did God make on day whatever? And it was actually just last night I asked, or 2 nights ago, I asked James. I said, James, what did God create on day 1? And he sat there for a second, and I could see him kind of, and he said, God made light when there was none. Because we sing that little song, day one, God made light when there was none. And, one time I asked him, what did God create on day 4? And one of the little ones, you can sit there and see him going through the song. And then one of them yells out, sun and moon and stars galore. And because that's the way the song goes, to make it rhyme with 4. Sun and moon and stars galore. But what did God do on day 7? He rested, is the way the King James puts it. And I don't do this as much yet with the little ones, but as they get older, and I probably need to start doing this with them now just to get them in the mindset of it, but especially with our 4 older ones, a lot of times I would ask them, we'd talk about that, and I'd say, what about day 7? Oh, God rested. And I'd say, did he take a nap? Because he was so tired. And of course, they learn very quickly. They would say, no, Daddy, God never gets tired. In fact, some of you have seen the little video I have of Levi and his little mini sermon at my mom's house one time. I got the camcorder out and I was recording him, and I was asking him some stuff. I was going to put it on a Christmas video to give my parents or something, and he just started preaching away. And I said something about that, and he said, no, God never rests. He never gets tired because he's powerful, he said. He's powerful. So if you've seen that, you know how Levi's, and that's saying something coming from me, his country accent. But it doesn't mean that God rested because he was so tired. It means literally he ceased creating. And that's one of those subtle evidences of inspiration. Maybe I might even call it not so subtle. Because the first law of thermodynamics, scientists have learned, it's a law, it's not a theory. Matter can neither be created nor destroyed. We're not making more matter. But sometimes people say, well, Chad, people are making stuff all the time. They're building new cars, they're building new houses. Oh, yes, but you're using existing matter. And we might say, well, wake up, Chad, because I just had a bonfire the other night and I destroyed a lot of matter in that bonfire. Well, you changed its form. Some of it was converted into energy in the form of heat. You got smoke, ashes, and so on. But you didn't destroy it. It might change form, but matter can neither be created nor destroyed. And you see that in God ceasing creation after 6 days of creation. He rested. He ceased creating on the 7th day. Now, going on here, if we called that power God, from that previous question, is it possible that God could be eternal and also the builder of the universe? Well, again, I would hope somebody would agree here, even if they may say, well, I'm not sure I believe in that, but I might say, just follow me here. If we called that power God, if we say, okay, it's not possible for matter to be eternal, we know that. And let's just say, is it possible for a non-material power like mind or spirit to be eternal? Well, okay, yeah, it's possible. Well, if we called that power God, is it possible God is eternal and that he is the builder of the universe? And even if somebody says no, then we'll say, is it possible? I'm not asking if you agree yet, but is it possible? Well, yeah, I mean, I suppose it's possible. All right, let's proceed then. And of course, you see a reference here to Psalm 19:1. The heavens declare the glory of God, and the firmament shows his handiwork. By the way, I'll mention this. I forgot to put it in I worked on that slide today, and I forgot to put it in there. So I may mention this in my Sunday night sermon, my year-end sermon, but I'll go ahead and tell you, the folks in this class now, I had a request from one of our members, and I asked a couple of different folks about it, and they said they thought it was a really good idea, but one of the parents said to me, do you remember that series you did a few years ago on science and the Bible? It was a series that probably 95% of it was based off of Wayne Jackson's book. I think it's called The Bible and Science, or Science and the Bible. I can't remember the exact wording. But it was a series I did once a month, and we went through and looked at several lessons from that, and this was one of our parents here that said, look, I'm just thinking in terms of some of those children who were in the audience that were younger and maybe were kind of too young to grasp some of those things are teenagers now. Maybe it'd be a good thing to go back through that. And I asked a couple of different people just to say, I thought, well, I don't want to just do a complete repeat and have somebody feel like it was just, a rerun. But I asked one individual in particular said, I think you ought to teach that. I think you ought to preach through that series about every 2 or 3 years. So I don't know that we'll do it that often, but anyway, some of this stuff we'll talk about in that series, Science and the Bible, and I plan to do that Sunday evenings in 2023. That's a good stopping point because we're at a next heading here. Every design must have a designer. So we'll look at that. Design demands a designer. We'll unpack that, and again, we'll work our way through this booklet, and then we'll maybe make some points as we go along, as we did tonight with the cause and effect, but I want to go back and unpack design a little bit further and morality. And there's some really good points in here, as Bob says, taking both approaches, presuppositional, presupposing the Bible to be right, but also looking at the evidence. And I think it's just hard to argue with when you're looking at the evidence that God is. This universe had to be created, and the only adequate explanation is God. Well, we'll pick up there and talk about design requires a designer. Lord willing, next Wednesday night, that's 21st. Yes, 21st. All right, hard to believe. Today's the 14th. That means we're practically halfway through December. Time gets away. Thank y'all very much. I appreciate your time and attention, and thank you, Bob, for helping me out with those arguments.